Well, it's great to have all of you with us today. My name is Chris. I'm the lead pastor here at CATALYTIC Church, and I just want to extend a warm welcome to everyone connecting online and from all of our campuses. We're in this series called Courageous Endurance, and there's been an image, perspective that we've been looking at throughout the course of this entire series, and it's an image that you will find yourself in some place along the journey, because it's that image of, the image of a spiritual journey. And all of your spiritual journey looks something like this. For some of you, you find yourselves at the very, very beginning of the spiritual journey. You're at the place where you're just trying to figure out who God is. You're trying to figure out, is there a God? Maybe you're like all in with God. You're like, okay, I know God's there, but now you're like, but what version of God? So you're trying to figure out that. You're trying to figure out this whole religion, church thing, Jesus, the Bible. You have all of the big questions. You have all of the big concerns, and you're just trying to figure it out. And I just want you to know, if you find yourself at the very beginning of your spiritual journey, I just want you to know that Tri-County Church is a place that you're welcome. We're glad you're here. We're glad that you have all the questions that you have, all the doubts that you have, all the concerns that you have, that it's okay to be thinking what you're thinking right now, that we're just thankful that you're just on the journey, because at the heartbeat of Tri-County Church, we're just a group of people trying to figure this out together. And so if you're there, man, thank you for journeying with us, and keep asking your questions. There's no questions off limits. There's no thoughts that you have or perspectives that you have that's off limits. Like keep on processing, keep on journeying with us. For some of you, as you've made your way through your spiritual journey, you've come to this peak moment where you named Jesus the subject of your life, when Jesus became Lord and Savior of your life. And you see that the essence of who we are as a church is aligned with really at God's defined mission and purpose. We've talked about throughout this series that God's pursuit is for all people to pursue him. It's why God sent his son Jesus, so that all people who put their faith or trust in Jesus could have a forever relationship with God the Father. And that's just why we do what we do at Tri-County Church. That's why we're really comfortable with people that have massive questions about God and who aren't sure about Jesus. We're just like, hey, let's go. And along the way, we're just going to talk a whole lot about Jesus, because that was the vehicle that God put into motion. Because God's pursuit is for all people to pursue him. And if you've ever named Jesus as Lord and Savior of your life, you'll know that mountaintop experience is so incredible, but quickly, what happens? Some people call it a crisis of belief. Something in life comes crashing in on you, and you find yourself in this spiritual valley. And this is a storyline of this guy named Habakkuk that we've been following along this series, Courageous Leadership. A guy named Habakkuk that found himself in a spiritual valley. I mean, he was all in with God. God, I'm all in with you. And then he found himself down here. And what we've learned from just a snapshot, this quick little cross-section of his story of how he navigated through this spiritual valley. And I hope it's been extremely helpful, because at the very beginning of this conversation between Habakkuk and God, it starts off with Habakkuk saying, God, how long? How long? How long? And one of the things we've learned that in the valley, it always includes the waiting. And maybe you're in a waiting season right now. You're saying the how long, God. You're going to God and you're wanting God's reply. You're wanting God's answer. You want God to say something to you. You want God to move in you. And there's just nothing. And when you're in the waiting, it can feel like God's not present. It can feel like God's not listening. It can feel like God's not there. But in all reality, sometimes God just says, you got to wait. You got to wait. You got to wait. You got to wait. And if you're in the waiting, no, God is present. If you're not hearing from God, maybe God's just not ready yet. Maybe you're not ready yet to hear what he's about to say to you. And when you're in the waiting, when you're in that waiting period, the thing that's always attached to waiting is the wondering. It's all the why God questions. The why God questions that sometimes, they don't really have good answers attached to them. Sometimes there's just no answers at all to the why God questions. Do you have some why God questions that you've tried to figure out what the right answer to your why God questions? You've come to the point where there's just no answer God could give me to satisfy the why God. I have those. And one day, because I'm writing them down, one day I'm going to sit with God and say, God, you have all eternity. You better answer these with good answers. But sometimes there's just not good answers to the why God. And what's interesting is we've looked at this honest conversation with Habakkuk and God. Guess what? God doesn't answer all of Habakkuk's why God questions. He just doesn't answer them. He just doesn't answer them. And when God finally speaks to Habakkuk, Habakkuk realizes it's going to go from bad, meaning the moral depravity of Judah that he was living in, was going to go from bad to extremely bad because God said, hey, I'm going to send in the evil, the vile Babylonians. That's my answer, Habakkuk. And then we experience Habakkuk wrestling with God. You see, the waiting and the wandering, if it doesn't include the wrestling, you will always wander away from God. And for some of you, that's where you are right now. It's where you are right now. You waited, you wondered, you waited, you wondered, you waited, you wondered, but you never wrestled with God. And so now you're wandering away from God. You're running away from God. For some of you, you're still wandering and you're not even sure why you're here. You're not even sure why you're connecting online because you're wandering away from God. I'm it's all tethered to the wrestling. And here's the thing. When you get underneath what the name Habakkuk means, Habakkuk means to wrestle, to hold on to grapple, to embrace God. And it is in the wrestling, especially when you're waiting and wondering, it is in the wrestling. That's why Habakkuk's on this conversation with God. His toe-to-toe, spit splattering, veins bulging, words spewing, silence deafening, no holds barred conversation with God. It was in the wrestling that led him to this last action. And this last action is what's going to take for you to climb or to crawl out of the valley. And we discovered at the very last part of this interaction between God and Habakkuk. And that last action is worship. That it is in the waiting, the wandering, and the wrestling that led him to worship God. And worship is it's going to help you climb out of that spiritual valley. So Habakkuk has come out of the waiting, the wondering, and the wrestling. And it says this, a prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet. Now, it's not really a prayer. We'll get to that word in a moment. But remember, prayer is talking to God. But before Habakkuk gets to this conversation with God, that's going to look very uniquely different, there's one last kind of petition or one last request that Habakkuk has for God before he gets to this quote-unquote prayer. And this is the request that he has. Lord, I've heard of your fame. I stand in all of your deeds, Lord. Repeat them in our day, in our time. Make them known. And what Habakkuk is saying is, hey, God, I know who you are. I know how you freed the Israelites from captivity. I know how you parted the Red Sea. I know how you fed them and gave them water and everything they needed to not only just survive, but to thrive as a group of people. God, I know how you led them during the day and at night. God, I know how you protected them and got them to the promised land. God, I know all the stories about you. I stand in awe of all the things you've done. God, this is my request. Repeat them in our day. What you did for the Israelites so many years ago. God, I want to see you move in that way now. God, what you did for them then, do for us now. God, how you showed up then, show up like that now. God, how you provided for them then, provide for us like that now. God, I trust because what I know about you, God. Repeat that now. And then he adds this one little PS. He goes, in wrath, remember mercy. This is like the PS. Hey, God, as your righteous judgment, your righteous wrath is going to come in via the Babylonians. remember mercy. Hey, God, there's some of us, they're still following you. Hey, God, there's a small group of us. Their eyes are still following you. The rest of Judah, they're going their own way. The rest of Judah are following their own gods. They're not following. The rest of Judah have just caved into complete moral depravity. But God, there's a few of us pursuing you. So God, in your wrath that we're going to experience, remember your mercy. And then we get into this prayer. Now, it says a prayer of Habakkuk. And remember, prayer is it's just a conversation with God. It's talking with God. And there's many different ways to pray. But then maybe you notice this one really big word here. It's an ancient Hebrew word. And no one really knows how to pronounce this one ancient Hebrew word. So if you say it real fast, maybe people will think you're an expert. So it's called Shigionoth. Like that, I'm a Hebrew expert. All of you are in awe right now because you have no idea if I said that right or not. But if you say it fast, then you're an expert, right? So this is Shigionoth, and Shigionoth was kind of a marker, a musical annotation where most scholars aren't really sure what it completely means, but they kind of have a foggy framework what this one kind of musical marker means. And what it tells us is a couple things. One is this is more of like a worship song. So it's a prayer in form of a worship song, and Shigionoth has everything to do with this kind of chaotic, emotive, fierce, emotional response. What we know about Shigionoth is it was played on string instruments, and there was music professionals that would play the music, and this prayer, this poem, this song would be sung or chanted, but it's an emotional response. It's not some somber song. It's not some peaceful song. No, this is emotion. Think about where this comes. Habakkuk has been in the spiritual valley, right? He's been waiting. We don't know how long. God finally speaks. And Habakkuk is like, really, God? That's your answer? More wondering, more why gods, more wrestling, more embracing God. I mean, Habakkuk is all in with God, saying, God, I'm not going to let go of you, but we got to figure this out. So this is where Habakkuk has been. And all of a sudden, through this process, he goes, God, I'm going to trust you. God, I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. God, I don't understand why you responded like you responded. God, I don't understand why you're sending the Babylonians. That doesn't make sense to me. And so many innocent lives are going to be hurt and killed. I mean, you're going to destroy. Like, God, I don't understand why. But God, I trust you. The Shigionoth is all about the sovereignty of God and God's promise to deliver. That God's promise is that he will do everything that he set out to do. Again, it's this emotional, chaotic, frenzied worship of sovereign God. Shigionoth. And so as I was thinking about this worship kind of song, this Shigionoth, remember, it was played on stringed instruments. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how it could maybe sound. And this was like several thousand years ago, and now we're in 2020, right? Like, it looks different. And I started thinking through, I grew up playing guitar. And if you wanted me to play for you a great late 1980s hair metal, power ballad, electric guitar solo, I'm your guy. I can nail that. But I would not call myself a professional musician. So I thought in this moment, because I want to read the Shigionoth, like maybe kind of how it would have sounded. So I thought we should get a musical professional, unless you want me to play for you a 1980s power ballad electric guitar solo. Then again, I could do that right now. No one's saying yes. So why don't you welcome out to the stage our music professional, Garrett Rowan. Garrett, come on out. And here's a cool story about Garrett. Whether you know Garrett or not, this might be news to you. I've taught Garrett everything he knows about guitar. It's news to Garrett as well, yeah. I whispered subliminal messages. That just got weird, but that's okay. So he's our musical professional, and just imagine, again, that, Back at around 600 BC, they didn't have an electric guitar with electric guitar amps and pedals, right? They didn't have that. They had different stringed instruments, but they also didn't have indoor plumbing at 600 BC. So, right, we contextualize everything. So just think, this is our version of a stringed instrument. And you got to embrace where Habakkuk is spiritually and emotionally. Remember the season that he's come out of. This toe-to-toe, spit splattering, veins bulging, words spewing, silence deafening, no holds barred conversation with God. This is what he's come out of. And he's come to the place to say, God, I'm just going to trust you. I don't understand it. I don't like it. I don't get it all, but God, you are sovereign God. And you will always do what you say you're going to do. And out of this comes the Shiggineth. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. Plague went before him, and pestilence followed his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed, but he marches on forever. I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. Were you angry with the rivers, Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode your horses and your chariots to victory? You uncovered your bow. You called for many arrows. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. Torrents of water swept by. The deep roared and lifted its waves on high. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows, the lightning of your flashing spear. In wrath, you strode through the earth, and in anger, you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot. With his own spear, you pierced his head when his warriors stormed out to scatter us, gloating as though about to devour the wretched who are in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, and churning the great waters. The Shiggineth. You see, trust in God leads to worship of God. It's in trusting God that God is who he says he is. Trusting that God will do everything that he has promised to do leads to worship. Leads to worship. In Habakkuk, in the waiting, the endless waiting, in Habakkuk, in the wondering, all the why God questions, in Habakkuk, in the wrestling, came to the place to say, God, I trust you. Trust you. And trust leads to worship. Leads to worship. Leads to worship. Well, why don't you give Garrett a big thank you. And again, if you want me to play that 80s power ballad solo, I'm your guy. And after the Shigionoth, after Habakkuk gets done in this chaotic, frenzied moment of worship, says, I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. I mean, this moment of worship, it enveloped his body. And he said, yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. Habakkuk starts this part of his spiritual journey saying, how long, God, how long? Along the journey, God says, I'm sending in the Babylonians. And now we find Habakkuk as he's worshiping God, because trust leads to worship. And now he says, God, I will wait patiently. God, I know the Babylonians are going to come in. I know it's going to go from bad to beyond imagination bad. But God, I'm just going to wait in you because I trust in you. And then Habakkuk is going to talk about how bad it's going to get. And it's kind of this progression. Like, it's going to be bad, but then he's going to walk us through how bad it's going to look. And he starts off by saying this, though the fig tree does not bud. And for us, again, it's kind of hard to understand what he's saying. So think about this, like figs back then, 600 BC, in that part of the world, figs were a delicacy. It was like kind of that special treat. Some of you know that one of my, things I love, I cannot have them in my house at all because I won't eat one or three. I'll eat the whole package. Double stuffed Oreos or mega stuff. Amazing. They've changed my life for the bad and the good, right? But that's what he's saying. Like the figs were like that delicacy, that one special item that, right, you just love. And he goes, those aren't going to be around. And he goes, and not just the fig trees, and there's no grapes on the vines. Now grapes were used to make wine. And for them, during that period of time, and for thousands and thousands of years, wine was used as a common everyday drink. Why? Because when water sat around, it would go bad, and bad water would kill people. But wine could be kept for long, long periods of time, and it wouldn't kill people. And what he's saying is our source of hydration, our source of drink, we're not going to have it. Now, they could find other sources. They could go walk and find running water, good sources of water. It was going to be more of an inconvenience, but still, right? It's going to be an inconvenience. And then he says, though the olive crop fails. And again, during this period of time and for thousands of years in this region, the olive trees are an essential source, not just of eating olives. That's what we think of, olives. No. They would produce olive oil that they would do all of their cooking with. And not only for cooking, they would have olive oil lamps, and that was their one source of light at night. They'd burn these lamps using olive oil. It's our electricity. It's like we're not going to have anything to cook with or to light our houses. But it gets worse. And the fields produce no food. Wheat, barley, grain. That was their major source of food. Food for them, but also food for their livestock. He's like, hey, the starvation is going to hit the land. People are going to die because they're not going to have food. And then also, the sheep that we use for clothing, to cover our bodies, to protect our bodies. And the cattle are going to be gone. And they wouldn't eat the cattle. They might eat a few of the sheep, But the cattle were used for plowing the fields. The cattle were used to move product to different towns. They were work animals. They were a core source of their economic engine. And Habakkuk goes, all of this is going to go away. Yet I will. Think about the circumstances that Habakkuk's going to face. So many times we go to pray to God and we want our circumstances to change, and when they don't change, right? Then we get mad at God. We're like, God, why didn't you? I thought you were a good God. I thought you loved me. I thought you were right. All of those wondering why God's. And what Habakkuk is saying is, God, I understand that my circumstances aren't going to change. You're still sending in Babylon. It's going to go from bad to beyond bad. Again, trust leads to worship. He goes, yet I will rejoice in you. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. Because for Habakkuk, his joy wasn't tethered to his circumstances. His joy was tethered to God. For Habakkuk, as he was coming out of the spiritual valley, worship led him back to God, say, God, you are sovereign, and I'm going to trust in you. And then it was like he was trying to process to find the right name for God that expressed everything that he had been navigating through, this honest conversation that he's been having with God, the waiting, the wondering, the wrestling, and now in the shigganeth, the worship, and he's trying to find the right name, and all of a sudden he lands on the name, and he just goes, the sovereign Lord, or Yahweh Adonai is my strength. And Yahweh Adonai makes my feet like the feet of deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. See, worship is what helps us crawl out of the valley. But worship isn't just about singing. Worship isn't just about the shigganeth. You see, it's so much more. Paul in Romans chapter 12 says, therefore, offer your bodies, offer your entire selves as a living sacrifice. The image he was painting was just reflecting Jesus on the cross. Because remember, God's ultimate mission, his ultimate purpose, is that God's pursuit is for everyone to pursue him. And that's why he sent Jesus to die on the cross, so that all people who put their trust, their faith in Jesus, God the Son, would have an eternal relationship with God the Father. And Paul says, therefore, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, meaning you're alive. But when you name Jesus as a subject of your life now is all in God's hands. Christ followers, do you live your life as if 100% all is in God's hands? Now, God might not ask all from you right now. He might ask 40% from you. He might ask 70% from you. He might ask 92.35% from you. But your position is to say, God, my entire life is a living sacrifice. My entire life is now not my life. God, my life is in your hands. God, my time is in your hands. God, my passions are in your hands. God, my gifting is in your hands. God, my bank account is in your hands. God, all of me is available for you, God. And if you want 100%, it's yours. Is your entire life a living sacrifice? I don't come from a whole lineage of pastors, preachers, and there's nothing wrong with those who do. I'm the first pastor in my entire family. I come from a whole line of business leaders, and then God, just sophomore year in high school, I said, God, I'm all in, and God said, I want 100%. I want 100%. Many times I've tried to give God like 92% or 87%, and God's like, no, Chris, your life, I want it all. But I remember that moment when I said, God, okay, I'm going to be all in. If you want all of me, here's all of me. That's why Paul says, therefore, offer yourselves, your bodies, your entire life as a living sacrifice that's holy and pleasing to God. And then he goes on, he says, this is your spiritual act of worship. See, worship is more than singing. Worship is every day. When you wake up in the morning, you say, God, my day is your day. My time is your time. My money is your money. My desires are your desires. God, how are you going to use me today? God, what do you want from me today? God, I don't know what that looks like, but I just want you to know today, 100% is available to you. And as you make your way through the day, realize that's worship. And when God intersects your life with someone else's life and it's inconvenient and you feel all that inconvenience within you and you're like, well, I got to hit the grocery store and I got to pick up the kids. I got to do all this stuff. God, I don't want time today. You give God your time. And when God starts to nudge you to use your gifting, to be a part of his mission, his purpose, which again, God's pursuit is for all people to pursue him. It's that simple. Christ followers, you got to listen to this. It's that simple. And you realize that you're 100% in because you realize that you're called to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. That's your spiritual act of worship. It will change how you view everything. You see, we've been looking at this cross-section of our spiritual journey. But in all reality, it looks more like this, doesn't it? Yeah, there's always the first big spiritual valley. But as you go on with life, right, there's a whole bunch of different spiritual valleys. Sometimes they come one after another. Some of you, that's where you are right now. Like you're climbing out of one, you're like, oh, yay, God. And then all of a sudden, bam. You're like, again, God? Sometimes the climb up is so steep. And the fall is so far. Sometimes you're going sideways. You're like, I didn't even think that was possible. But when you're all in with God, you're like, God, I'm going to trust you with all of me, which means all of me is available, God, for you to use me. You start to realize not only are you navigating through your spiritual journey, but God's going to intersect your life with other people's lives. And when you start to realize that just maybe, you're going to loop into a valley with someone, and they're going to say to you, it just feels like God's not there. Feels like God's not talking to me. And all of a sudden you just go, yeah. Maybe God is just saying to you, you need to wait. Or maybe you find yourself navigating with someone in the spiritual journey and they have all the why questions. And instead of just trying to offer them some simplistic Christianese type of answer, maybe you'll just sit in the valley with them saying, yeah, that's a great question. I have no idea why God is allowing. I'm not sure why God is doing. There's no good answer. Do you realize that sometimes, there's not an answer for why God is allowing or God is doing? And maybe the best thing you can do is sit in the valley with someone saying, yeah, you should add that to your list. And one day ask God. And maybe for you, as you sit in the valley with someone, you need to look at them and say, you should scream at God for a while. You need to let go, like Habakkuk did. And maybe, just maybe, God wants you in the valley with someone and worship with them as they climb, as they crawl up out of the valley. Trust in God leads to worship of God. And not only does God want you on that journey, he wants you walking with people through their journey. Because God uses people like you, people like me, and people like Habakkuk to help people through the highs and through the valleys of this thing called life.